Meets World.
What up, bros?
What up, bros?
And welcome to Bruh Meets World.
When it's Bruh Meets World.
Your boy Meets World Foundcast. I am Siege.
I'm Tony Curtis. How you doing, bro?
I am doing well, man. Doing good. We had a lot of really good weeks lately, so I'm just gonna vibe with that.
Yeah, and I have to say, season 6 there's a lot more meat on the bones than I thought.
Yeah.
In terms of just things to talk about, it may not necessarily be the most enjoyable season, but there's so much to talk about with every episode. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Absolutely. And we have a very special episode that we're going to be talking about this week. Before we get into that, let's do our morning announcement. We are I'm loving it. We are getting more of your 5-star reviews. There's just one more I want to share with you guys. We got one from Aka Christie. I want to make sure I hope I said that right. Aka Christie is probably very, very much a punny name that I am butchering, so I apologize.
Sure.
But either way, she says, I've been waiting for a Boy Meets World podcast with a black lens. As a black woman, I've loved this show growing up, but always had a different POV as one from a black girl. This podcast is funny and the hosts have a great dynamic. So
hey,
just really wanted to shout that out. Thank you guys. Keep the reviews coming in.
Appreciate the love.
You can give us your 5-star reviews at Bruh Meets World on any of the platforms, and also Spotify be allowing y'all to rate. So
yeah, and on our website, you guys can actually leave voice messages as well that we can play on the podcast. So keep that in mind for future episodes. If you have questions, comments, anything like that, we can get into it live on the show.
I have so much more I want to talk about, but before I do so, I want to bring in, we have a very special guest this week.
Yeah, we do.
This week, we are bringing in Jamal Adam, creator and owner of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s Vibes podcast. He's a podcaster, content creator, and network owner. Welcome, Jamal.
What up,
man? Thank you guys for having me. I'm a huge fan of the show. A huge fan of Boy Meets World. I'm honored. I really am. So I'm excited to do this episode with you guys, man. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I was like, even though we have more to say, Jamar's waiting to hop in. I was looking at you, being like, oh.
All right, it's good, man. Hey, bro, I'm a guest.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just happy to be here.
What's your history? Well, we can start with, because we were talking about black sitcoms, or even sitcoms from when we were growing up. What's your history with both Boy Meets World and what else were you watching at the time?
Man, I always like to say, and any of my close friends that I still have growing up, coming to my house was unique because it was a balance. We may start off the day watching the Golden Girls. We go from Golden Girls to Boy Meets World to BET to MTV. So I'm one of those guys that I'll give it a chance. And I was a huge TV watcher. So one day I was maybe 8, 7. I was just scrolling, channel searching. Boy Meets World popped up. It caught my attention. I fell in love. I've been in love ever since.
I think what's interesting about that is, what do you think it was about the show that you really connected with?
I love the comedy, but I love the seriousness too. That's the reason why Fresh Prince is one of my favorite shows also. Because it can make you laugh, it can make you cry, it can make you think, especially with Feeney. I think that was Feeney's whole role, but it was the balance. And they were kids, which I was a kid at the time, very relatable, going through stuff. As you become a kid to a teenager, right? To a young adult, they kept it real. The problems got more serious as they got older. So it was always a balance.
100%, 100%. I'm a little curious, Jamar, just quickly, what kind of stuff do you cover on your podcast, the 80s, 90s, 2000s podcast?
Everything nostalgic, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. It can be an old TV show, it can be an old actor, a sitcom, or it can be a specific person. Like yesterday, we did a Kanye episode, a Kanye versus Adidas episode. If it's modern, it's cool as long as it's tied to somebody who's tied to nostalgia. So anything nostalgic, we talk about, man. So we have fun, and we still learn. Shout out to Triborough and Prime, my co-host. We still learning, man. So yeah, we having fun doing it.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. All right. So that being said, are you ready to get into this episode? Because I feel like this episode in particular, there is a lot of meat on the bone. Like we have a lot that we could be talking about in this episode.
There's also a lot of masculine energy in this episode. Like, I'm glad we got another dude in here so we can like get like, is this really how men like
exactly
like,
what happens when women aren't around on a podcast?
Unfortunately, I think it is.
Okay, that should lead us to our tell me about it. T,
yeah.
You be able to tell me about it?
Yeah. Tell us about it. Well, the boys will be boys. Engagement ring off at the slightest sign of another man giving Cory a hard time.
You know what? I liked it. It was a summary. All right. Yeah. For everyone listening, this is season 6, episode 8. You're married, you're dead. To prove he's still one of the guys, despite being engaged, Cory goes to a club with scantily clad women where he loses his engagement ring and desperately tries to keep Topanga from finding out. She, of course, does and reminds Cory that wearing the ring in the first place was his idea and that he remains free to do what he wants, but within reason. In a B storyline, Rachel, currently working on her term paper, dealing with how women influence male bonding, observes Eric and Jack's off-the-wall behavior with cool amusement. And that is the episode. I found this episode very, very interesting because it does, even for like a 90s show, it picks up on a lot that I want to talk to. But as usual, Jamar, what's your first impression?
Cory is dealing with being young and engaged. In college, this is season 6, right? So it's 7 seasons of Boy Meets World.
Yeah,
correct.
So yeah, they're deep in college at this point. He's still dealing with becoming a young man, young adult, hanging around a lot of single guys too, and of course Sean is single at this point, at a specific time, and being engaged and realizing, hey, he thinks he can't do what he normally did anymore, but that's so false. Like as you just said, with the Topanga saying that you went in the ring was your choice. So I think he dealt with a bunch of insecurities, a bunch of he dealing with a bunch of masculinity, like he said, a bunch of that toxic masculinity. It can be toxic at times, but yeah, he dealing with a bunch of that.
Absolutely. I love that like you said that. So Jamar, really quickly, what is your like relationship status?
Well, it's crazy because the girl I'm talking to and hopefully is going to marry soon is somebody I've been knowing since I was 13.
Oh wow!
You have a Topanga.
Yeah, absolutely, bro. Absolutely.
Wow,
yeah,
that's
man.
fantastic.
Yeah, it is, man. That's indeed.
All right, so you being like trying to get into a serious relationship have a certain lens coming into this because you're not engaged, but you're like trying to get into something serious. Siege here recently got engaged, and
hey, congratulations, man.
Yeah, thank you.
And I celebrate my 1-year wedding anniversary next week.
Hey,
so we're coming at this from 3 very different places. But I would say I feel like each one of us can kind of relate to certain aspects of this. So Siege, what was your first impression of this episode?
I love that you said like it was interesting as we know, like it's so crazy how we are following this show in like the timeline, and I happen to be newly engaged while Cory and Topanga are also engaged, because it is crazy for me to have like a certain perspective while watching this and having certain conversations and certain thoughts. And so for me watching this episode, it was really interesting to see both how they wrote the other single male characters and kind of like the whole he's married now, he's not even engaged, he's just straight up married, he's whipped, we can't do anything. And then also Cory, I thought Cory had some really valid points of being like why can't I, like I'm engaged, I'm not dead. And No, but then there was like this insecurity of like needing to front for the boys. And I
Yeah,
thought that
taking
was
the
like,
ring off.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was like, yo, it's funny because they were like, what kind of guy wears an engagement ring? I was like, yo, I'm doing it. And like, do you see this ring? I'm flaunting it. Like,
Hey, ain't nothing wrong with that at all, man.
exactly.
Yeah.
But that comes from like the security of who I am. But then
Mhm.
also, I'm older. So I think there's something to be said
Yeah.
about the idea of like,
Mhm.
you're not in college. And I think we kind of hit on this earlier with Sean and this idea of Sean being single while in college and purposefully so. So he didn't feel like he had to answer to anyone. And then you have Cory who kind of like wanted to secure it and lock it in because he knew he wouldn't get any better. And him having to like grow through college during that. So anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what you felt, T.
There's a lot I want to get into specific wise, and you guys have already hit like some points that I think are really I'm excited to dive into deeper. One of the things I really appreciated was that this show could have really easily treated the women who work at this restaurant in a very specific way, made them seem like they were just like kind of bimbos, I guess. But the fact that they showed them as college students, as like normal, like, hey, I go to class and oh, well, yeah, I work there. It's not a big deal. Like, I like the fact that the women weren't villainized in this episode for just like, making bread. Like, it's not that big of a deal. So it's just that was one of the things that stood out to me because as we've watched this show, we've seen the way that they sometimes can do women wrong and like do them dirty. And so it was just nice to kind of see that like there's some really interesting conversations about men and women behavior in this episode. And even though I think that it's kind of cartoony how like douchey like the other guys are and like teasing a 19-year-old for like having a relationship. Like all of it just felt like, why are they giving him such a hard time? He just wants to play cards. Like he can't be married and play cards. Like it felt like a little too much. But I do like some of the bigger conversations that they're having about like, what men feel like they do when they're with men versus their relationships and things like that. So yeah, that's my first impression.
Absolutely love it. So to kind of like kick us off, I do want to bring up one of the main kind of like other characters that we get in our roll call,
Yep.
and that is the actor Phil Buckman who plays Gambling Dan. He was a pretty he like worked pretty seriously in television acting. He's on Boston Public. He's on
I didn't recognize that dude at all.
Beverly Hills 90210, smart guy. He's just in a lot of things, but he's also, from what I can tell on his IMDb, he's also like a pretty strong working voice actor as well.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I'm not gonna lie, you guys know I am not above admitting these things. Gambling Dan was hot. I'm just gonna say it. Like I was
You gotta turn on my Turner moment. Was it because he was a douchebag though?
Here's the thing. I was like, no, here's the thing. I think it's that mixture. It's that college, that very toxic college mixture of, okay, you may be like one of the cuter ones in the room, but then you cocky with it, and I like confidence. So you're a douchebag. I don't want to hang out with you on a regular basis, but you're not wrong that you're hot. I was just saying.
What wasn't the guy with him? Didn't he play in the movie Heavyweights? Do y'all remember?
Yes.
Oh, I was waiting for T to talk about.
I can't wait to talk about him. And actually, like, okay, yeah, Sean Weiss. Sean Weiss, yeah, as Louis. So yeah, this dude was like a child actor. He was in Mighty Ducks. He was in Heavyweights. Like Goldberg from Mighty Ducks was such like as a young chubby kid in the 90s. There was only so many of us on screen. There was like him and Keenan were like it.
Yeah.
And so like it was like cool to see him in projects. And so like it's cool to see him in the show. His character is weird. Like the show always writes like tough guys to have lackeys for some reason. Like I don't know what that's about. Like they did that with Harley and Joey and in high school and the seasons 3 and 4 and stuff like that. So it's just kind of weird, that dynamic. But the reason why I want to talk about this dude is because like there were some images circling around online of him like a few years ago, just going through like a really hard time, like drugs, homeless, like all this stuff. He had lost all this weight, but he had looked sick with it, you know? And then recently a resurgence of him being healthier and like getting his life back together. So I just thought that was like a cool thing that I thought about when I saw him. I was like, oh man, this must have been right before things started getting bad for this dude, but he's since come back. But I just I had to shout him out because he's such like a pinnacle part of my childhood.
Okay, going back to the episode, let's just talk about it. So we open up with a poker game inside the dorm room, which it's whatever. I didn't really play poker in college, but that's just such like a typical thing, right?
Yeah.
It's such a typical TV trope of like, this is what guys do. They get together, they play poker. I guess now it'd be like a bunch of guys playing video games, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's when I was in college, it was that playing video games, or we'll go hoop, play basketball or something. That's about it.
But I think what's really important is that like Sean is basically expanding his circle right now, and he's expanding his circle of friends, and the type of friends that he's entertaining are ones that I would say are maybe a little bit more traditional. And it actually kind of makes sense when we know where Sean comes from, that this is kind of, maybe it's like Sean kind of like wanting to find things that feel a little familiar. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I just think this dude is like single, and he's just trying to hang out with other single dudes. Like,
can I say something real quick? I'm so it's clearly Sean is dealing with him and Angela breaking up. You can tell he is.
Yeah.
He just handled it in the most Sean way. You get what I'm saying? So
yeah, to try to cover it up.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting because throughout the episode, we do get Sean kind of being like, yo, I'm in college. I'm purposefully doing this. There's a point in this episode where he goes, we're in different situations, and he's not wrong. And I feel like I feel like the show is kind of hinting, and it even feels like Sean purposely put himself in this situation, not necessarily because he even wants to be, but because that's where he feels he should be. Does that make sense? Does anyone agree?
Yeah, I agree.
You know what? I kind of agree. Sean's in you're right. Sean's in the situation because he wanted to be. He was man enough to at least tell Angela, like, hey, this isn't something I think is gonna be good for me, and I'm out of it, versus Cory, who's kind of like fighting it internally. But I guess my main beef with Sean in this episode is that, unlike your perspective, which I respect, Siege, I don't see why Sean would hang out with these dudes. We're always seeing Sean hang out with people who are like the worst versions of him.
Yeah, yes.
But the people who he loves and the people who he genuinely gets along with are never anything like the people he ends up hanging out with when he's like struggling. And so it's just odd. Like, I get what you're saying. Like, he comes from like a background where like that's maybe part of it. But I just don't think we see that in his character enough to justify him just hanging out with guys who are just like absolutely, there's no redeeming qualities to these dudes. I don't see why he would want to hang out with them at all. So I don't know.
It's a pattern of him doing that even from when they were younger in high school. He always seems to find somebody worse than him. Like, it's him times 10.
Yeah.
Right. And you're right. And it's again, it's a lot. It has a lot to do with how he was raised, how he was brought up. But he tends to, I don't want to use the word hurt. He tends to do damage to people who genuinely care about him. That's Sean's struggle throughout this whole series.
All right, but see, all right, thank you both, because I'm going to actually, of course, double down on my position to say that totally makes sense to me. You're going to tell me that you guys haven't been in situations where it's like, kind of like, hey, this is like the right thing to do, but this is the familiar thing to do. And I feel like with guys like that, there's a reason why Sean always finds these guys, because again, they're familiar. There's what he's used to from the neighborhood that he grew up with. I think that we forget that Cory was the exception. The reason why Sean always gravitates towards Cory especially in the earlier seasons, is that Cory's life is the exception. It's different from everything Sean's surrounded with. So the idea of Sean being like, hey, I have Cory, and Cory is my stability and my constant, but I'm going to seek out things that reminds me of my cousins, that reminds me of my neighbors at the trailer park. You know, it's just like he's going to, it makes sense to me that he's looking for people who, honestly, let's be clear, probably like a young Chet is what we're looking at here. Or like a young
similar to his dad.
One of his uncles, where it's like, oh, it's some toxic masculinity, it's some just male bravado. Like, I remember being young and being surrounded by all of that, and I also know plenty of my male peers who I was like, that's not you, that's not what you interested in. But because you are kind of young and trying to define what masculinity means, you go with what's familiar.
I agree. It's and it's funny because I haven't, when we touched on Cory and Topanga, like you said, it's kind of, I remember how I was at that age, but I'm 29, right? So 29 Jamal and 19 Jamal are two completely different people.
Yeah.
So 29 Jamal don't mind Cory. Why? Wear your ring, relax, you know. But 18 Jamal, no. Nah, man. So he's such, and Cory was mature for his age, but the immaturity will come out at times.
Yeah.
So people forget that he's still 19. And I try to be sensitive towards that. That's all.
Absolutely. Go ahead, T.
Yeah. Part of what this episode really gets into is like fronting for the boys. And I feel like that's an actual very true thing. And I'm actually like not mad at the show for kind of getting into that. I don't feel like it's again, Cory's behavior is the most realistic as we go through the episode, but there is something true about just like trying to like hype yourself up, trying to make yourself seem bigger, trying to make yourself seem, I don't know, just trying to get the approval of other dudes. Cause it really, all right. So one of the things I want to talk about in that opening scene where they're playing poker is they're starting to lay in heavy on like, oh, were you at your virgin support club? Like we're there. This show talks about virginity and like sin and morality, like in like different weird ways. But this is like the first time someone flat out called Cory a virgin and made him feel bad about it, shaming him for it. And I guess I'm wondering like how much of this is kind of like sexual frustration of Cory.
Well, because they haven't had sex yet, right? Because they didn't have sex until the next season when they got married. So yeah, he probably is sexually frustrated. That's a great point.
Well, speaking of sexually frustrated, I want to talk about the club that they are so hyped to go to, Club Clavage. Because first of all, I was like, oh, cleavage. And like that's very television, just to kind of like riff on that. But then also I was like, this is a Hooters. It's so funny to be like, yo, y'all upset about going to a Hooters? That's a big deal to you?
It almost felt like it almost felt like they were like, hey, we want to do a strip club, but ABC's not letting us do a strip club. Like Disney didn't give us the okay, so like we have to water it down because not only do they treat it like they're going to a strip club, but like all the girls who work there, they're like, oh, it's a bachelor party. Hey, girls, come over here. Sitting on laps, giving shoulder rubs, and I'm just like, ain't nobody rubbed my shoulders when I got chicken wings at Hooters. Like, that's
Thank you.
That's not how they act. Like, so it just felt like they wanted it to be something where they were like implying it without being able to really hard pedal the real.
That, but then also I was going to say, I do remember being young. I was younger than this, but also we often talk about how like the internet changed men's relationship to sexuality, in the sense of like in the 90s, before internet porn and all this other stuff, like seeing a boob, they'd be like, oh my god. like, and we're just like, yo, that's a nipple, get over it. But like I do remember being like 16, 17, and we would go to things like Kerr's Wings or Hooters, and you would feel like you're getting away with it. You know, you got like the girls like flirting with you, and you're like, oh, Like they're into me. But again, it's like one of those things where you're young enough to think that they're into you, and then you get older and it's like, no, that woman just wants a tip.
She's just doing her job. Yeah.
Yeah. She's trying to get
I
paid.
went to Hooters yesterday, man. That's just crazy.
Look at you doing research for the episode.
I was like, man, the food here is awesome. But I wouldn't. I'm older, so I'm like, I'm not here for the women. I just want. I wanted the wing. I wanted some wings. That's all.
Hooters has really good wings. I'm not gonna lie. Like,
Not only do they
man.
have good food, I also honestly, truly, and maybe this is just me, at the actual establishment of Hooters in this episode, I thought the women were pretty conservatively dressed. Like it was just like a shirt and shorts. And so to me, like when Topanga was freaking out and the girl was like, oh, you actually get more naked at the beach than you would at this place. Like I feel like there is something to that of just like calming that expectation that like, hey, guys are going there to like get lap dances or whatever. Like it's just it's a restaurant. That's it.
Yeah, I seen a girl wearing it in Whole Foods, man. Same
Yeah.
It's light. It's nothing. I didn't turn back twice. You know, it's normal.
but I think that we are looking at it from like a 2022 lens, because in the 90s there is this whole. Also, I think there's something about like the psychology behind it. And what I mean by that is, yeah, in reality, and as the waitress later in the episode kind of says, in reality, this is just a restaurant. You wear less clothes on the beach. It's nothing. But it's sold as like this forbidden place that girls would be so uncomfortable to go. Sex is at the forefront. It's like, oh, they were in push-up bras and the breasts are in your face. And it's just kind of like it's sold as, isn't this so risque? And it's like, in reality, no, it's not. It's nothing. But like it's being sold as this thing where it's like, oh, all the boys want to be there and none of the girls want to be there. And I just kind of feel like there's some of that energy.
Totally. And what's strange is outside of Angela later in the episode,
which we will talk about,
all of the men assume that the girls are going to give them such a hard time about it, but we don't actually get any of the girls' opinions about it until later. So it's like, even in that opening scene where they're playing poker and they're talking about going to Club Clavage, Cory's first thing is like, Angela's letting you go? You got the girl's permission to do this? And even though Sean has to remind them, yo, she ain't my girl anymore, I don't need her permission. The fact was that Cory's instinct was, oh, you need permission from your counterpart to do something like that, signifying that this place was something that would just naturally make any woman upset. Even Eric and Jack, they naturally assumed that Rachel would be so mortified, even though she doesn't say anything contrary to it. So it's weird that the men are just like treating women this way, even though they don't really have the information to back that behavior up.
Good question. Why they were being weird to me?
They were.
Because I'm confused between those three. Wasn't she dating Jack, or how was this? How was the dynamic at this point?
At this point in time, I love that you say, at this point in time, Rachel is not, she's just their roommate. She's not dating anyone. And so we have this whole thing where it's like, when you watch the show, there's like in-show universe, and then there's just like observer universe. In the show, they're just three roommates. Jack and Eric have like a friendship, and they have like this new female roommate, and it's really a lot of the conversation is, how do these guys behave while having a female presence in their midst? And like that's kind of like, so Rachel's whole thesis is pretty much the show's thesis at this point in time. But
they're also like actively crushing on her too. I will say that, like, the guys are showing interest in Rachel, but so far Rachel has not shown interest in either Jack or Eric specifically. I know that happens later on, but we're not there yet. So I'm glad you asked about it.
But also there is something to be said of like Jack and Eric really are having like this kind of, they have like couple energy. They're like this pair, this duo that just like, from the show's perspective, it seems like they're a couple and then Rachel's their third. You know what I mean? Like that's how it
romance.
Kind of feels. Yeah. It's that bromance. And then Rachel's actually the outside force. And the show's constantly being like, when will this outside force interrupt this bromance.
Yo, Jamar. Okay, so here's a question, because you were saying you were confused. Is it that you were confused that they would care at all about Rachel's opinion when neither of them are dating?
Yes.
Yeah, because that was my confusion too. I was like, why do they
Yes.
care what she thinks at all about this? Like, it all seemed so strange to me that they were so like, what do you care? We're
Yes.
not going anywhere. You can't tell us what to do. You're not our mom. What? And I was just like,
Because
just go out.
I know for a fact, even 29-year-old Jamar or 19-year-old Jamar, whichever one you get, I'm not gonna care if she thinks that I'm going to a bar, a hook, a lounge. If she's my roommate, not if she's my girlfriend, that's something different. But they roommates, so it's like the '90s version of Three is Company.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm like, why do y'all care so to the point where even when they're there and they don't know she's in the back, they still paranoid.
Still
Almost,
stressing.
it seems like. Yes, that part was weird to me because I didn't know if she started dating Jackie or started dating Eric. Yeah, I didn't know if they was at that point yet, but clearly they not because you could tell both of them still wants to be with her in some kind of way.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me is I think what you guys are bringing up and what we're kind of hinted of is this idea of the 90s being like, if you are interested in a woman or you see her as a potential partner, then you have to kind of adhere to her. It's like you don't want to mess with your chances of getting laid in any way. So it's just like, oh, like that's why with Cory and Topanga, Cory should like according to this show, should run it by Topanga before he does anything, or else he could jeopardize his relationship. Sean, even though he's not with Angela, he has to like Cory's like, oh, you didn't run it by her? What if she gets mad? And it's always seen as like women are like it's the women's fault. Women will be unjustifiably angry and women won't understand that men just want to be in a place with boobs. So because women can't understand it, you got to keep them out of it. And because if they knew that you were interested in other women, they wouldn't give you any kind of time of day. That's kind of like how I saw it.
Yeah, because it's interesting that like Cory is being teased for being whipped because of his behavior, because of how he's treating Club Clavage in the without, just from having his wedding ring on or his engagement ring, forgive me. But Eric and Jack are not in a relationship and they're acting the exact same way as Cory. So that was an interesting dynamic to see Cory get teased for his behavior and that just be like, well, that's just because he's engaged. If he were single, it wouldn't be a problem. But then we flip to this other thing and it's like, no, these guys are single and it's still a problem for them.
But you also see Sean kind of rebelling against it. Like Sean also sees like what Eric, Jack, and Cory are going through because they are kind of like still trying to get the approval of the women in their lives.
Yeah.
And Sean, this is what I was saying earlier, where it's like Sean's like purposely doing these things to be like, no, I'm not whooped. Even if I was with Angela, I do what I want, like type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's this idea of men thinking if you're with a woman, you give up all autonomy. Like you have to, like you're no longer to be a man in any sense because once you're married, you're dead. Like that's kind of like what Sean is actively pushing against, and I think that's what's hinted at.
And Cory, you could tell it's just in Cory's nature, he wants to be dead anyway.
Ooh, explain that.
I mean, because the name of this episode is "You're Married, You're Dead." Cory has been one. And there's nothing wrong with that. Cory, if Cory and Topanga got married that same day, and Cory would have been happy with that. He does not want to be in these settings. He thinks he does. He thinks
Cory
he does
is not
because Sean is in it. At all. Sean is in it, and Sean is his best friend. So that's the only reason why he's interested in it because that's what Sean is. But Cory wants to be married with him and Topanga somewhere in the house, and he would be happy with that. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like you said, he's not for the streets at all.
That's such an interesting point that so much of Cory's motivation isn't really to do with these other like Dapper Dan or whatever the hell this dude's
he can care less. He can care less about them because throughout the episode Dan talks crap to him, but he talks crap back. He like, and
Yeah.
he has a whatever attitude towards him. It's Sean.
Yeah, it's all about
Sean.
his dependency on Sean, for real. Yeah, that's a great point.
I think what's interesting about what you said is Cory. First of all, there are two things. One, Cory is not built for the streets, but he wants to be in the streets because Sean's in the streets.
Exactly.
And Sean feels like he's only been built for the streets.
Yeah.
So he refuses to have what he wants, what he truly wants, which is like a relationship with Angela, because he's like, nah, I know that I was raised in the streets and I'm made for the streets. And so that's where I belong. And I think that's very interesting. It's like two guys trying to put themselves where they feel like they should be, not necessarily where they're most comfortable.
Avoiding how you say that word? Avoiding I don't want to
inevitability.
Yeah, they both avoid. They both are meant to end up in the same place. Now, the way they get there are two different routes, but they both Cory, Topanga, Sean, Angela's both meant to be married with a house and kids. That's just the route is different. That's all.
I feel like it's interesting because with Cory, we've actually seen him be young and quote unquote married with Topanga and in a routine.
Yeah.
And even then he was bored and unhappy. So I think in reality, one of the problems is both Sean, Cory, and this episode sees things as an either or. Either you're out in the streets or you're at home with your girl. And the problem is that binary. It's like it's this or it's that. There is no in between. And as the three of us has talked about, like now that we're grown, I like even to this day, I'm like, oh, if I want to go somewhere, or like if I want to go to a Hooters, or like the gay equivalent or whatever, I would go because I would have security in myself and in my relationship, and I wouldn't do it for like front with someone trying to keep up. But at the exact same time, there is a respect I should have for my partner, which is what Topanga hits on later, where she's like, no, there is no jumping in and out. There is no rings off, my rings on. I have feelings too, and you should acknowledge those.
To me, she's being fair because she don't have a problem with him going. Her issue was him lying about it, and like you said, taking off his engagement ring. You can go, be free. Topanga didn't come off as insecure or trying to lock Cory down or anything like that. She was like, if you want to wear the engagement ring, you're going to wear it at all times. I think that was a non-negotiable for her.
And yes,
I thought her response of when she first found out about it, she was like, dude, I'm not even mad. Like, I get that you want to like hang out with guys. You want to belong to a group. Like, she was so understanding. She had a maturity that felt like old school Topanga. And like, we've been like, again, we're on season 6. So we've seen Topanga kind of like go from like young and rebellious to sometimes just being like a completely different character that's more concerned with like her looks, or more concerned with like things that don't
about
feel...
the episode when she slipped that.
yeah, stuff like that. Like, but there's like things about that like sometimes they can't decide if she's a feminist or not. Sometimes they can't decide like how traditional she should be. But in this episode, she just seemed like she was really mature and open-minded about it, and that it was she also communicated her needs very clearly too, which was really mature as well, compared to Cory, who didn't know how to communicate like, hey, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm trying to get out of this. He wasn't able to really articulate that in a way. So I just thought that she had a much higher level of maturity going into it.
I think it's funny because like looking at Topanga's like situation for it, like I said, there's this part where Topanga is just like, look, I didn't even tell you to wear the wedding ring. So it's not about you wearing the engagement ring. It's about you taking off the engagement ring and what that signifies. Like you felt pressure from other people to take off your ring. And she's like, but what you don't understand is they're all searching for something you have.
Which you've been having since you were a kid.
Yeah. And I think that's
rare.
I think that's very interesting that she understands like, oh no, like everybody's fronting, but they all want the security of having someone who cares about them. They all want. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I'm really glad that the episode was able to kind of land on that as like the overall. I think that's kind of like the overall lesson of the episode is that like, especially, dude, when you're sometimes like you're in a relationship, you see all your single friends going out. Oh, I'm like telling stories about, oh, I had this great date the other night or whatever. Like they could just make being single seem so glamorous, even though like we all know that there's such a loneliness and there's such like a flip side to like having to like go out on dates and having to play the whole game of like
What's your
DMing and all
favorite
that stuff.
color?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it's such like a grind and like a way that you forget about when you're far removed from it. And so like to have that compare and contrast of like Sean who's able to kind of do all these things and seeing the way it affects Cory who's trying to be in a serious relationship is really interesting.
Yeah, and the whole dating, bro, is getting to know somebody, then it just ends, and having to do it all over again, or dealing with somebody who gets ghosted.
Yeah.
It's a lot of starting over in dating. That's why, man, I'm 29. I'm like, all right, man, let's, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I didn't had enough, so I
And
understand.
and movies and TV shows, they'll just make being single seem a lot more glamorous. And the fact that Topanga was like, actually, everyone's just out there searching for love, dude. That's just what it's about. Like, let's be real about it. So, yeah,
But I
it's a
think
great lesson.
I think that's interesting. I think a few things. One, Topanga doesn't say everyone's out there looking for love. She says everyone's out there looking for someone who cares about them,
Oh yeah,
which I think is really important because that there is like a difference in that, and having just like security and safety, and not necessarily like that's actually what people are looking for. Even when they're looking for love, what you're really looking for is just having someone who you know cares about you.
yeah,
And for what she said her engagement ring means to her, that's what the ring means. It means, hey, I have someone who cares about me.
yeah,
And it's funny how she sees it as like almost liberating in the sense of, oh, I can walk anywhere in the world and everyone knows that I have someone who cares about me.
Mhm.
And Gambling Dan sees that ring as like chains. It's like, oh,
yeah.
once it's on, you're cut off from the world. Every like again, you're getting Whipped magazine, which I am not gonna lie, I really did shoehorn that in just because I thought the fact that Cory was like, there is a magazine and they found me. like I know that was funny.
Yeah, like it's she treats it as a badge of honor where the other one treats it as a chain. It's all about perspective. It's all about acknowledging like what it stands for you. Um Yo, I wanted to just ask Siege, have you or like either of you, like have you guys ever been like kind of bullied for being in a relationship? Like I don't know that anyone's ever like made like teased me the way that Cory's been teased for just being in a committed relationship. Like I guess I was just wondering if you guys had experienced any kind of like macho male ego pressure like that.
Uh, Honestly, no, because my relationships are so spaced out that
Mm,
when I do get in one, like one relationship, like I update my Facebook status and I start getting text calls. You know how on Facebook you can start dating. They're
Yeah.
like, you know, who you in a relationship with, Jamal? Like you don't get in those often. So when I do get into them, they be like, hey, all right, you know, because they be like,
yeah.
man, you gonna be by yourself forever, you know. So, but no, I ironically never dealt with that.
That's
Siege,
interesting.
anything?
I was gonna say, one, I think it's interesting, as you said, it's more of like especially when you get to a certain age, your friends start to be like, yo, what you doing?
What's
It's
up?
like,
What's
look,
up? What's up? Yeah.
we're starting to pair off. We
Yeah.
can't be here forever. So like you need to, what are you doing? What's your plan? So I think that's very interesting. But then also for me, I will say that I don't get teased for being in a relationship, but there are certain things that I could relate to in the sense of people would be like, "Oh, don't you got to run that by your partner?" And I'm like, "Excuse you, I'm grown." Like it's like
Yeah.
there's this kind of like defiance of you being like, "I answer to nobody." But then but you have to remember and catch yourself and be like, "Actually, I do." Part of being in a relationship is,
Yeah.
but like that's
I
not
gotta go home. Yeah.
that's not a bad thing. It's a respect thing. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of like this idea of like, you know what? I'm choosing to be an us. And
Yeah.
when you are an us, that doesn't mean I can't do anything that I want to do, but I should think how that affects us. And there's a difference between like only thinking about yourself as an us and thinking about how your actions as an individual affects us.
You know, it would have been really interesting to see this episode kind of dive into that concept of like, how do you balance the us versus the me? Because I feel like that, in terms of just being in the serious relationship, is something that's super like relatable and understandable. Of just like, you know, I want to be a unit, I want to be us, but at the same time, I don't want to feel codependent. I don't want to feel like
Clingy.
you're clingy, like we're
Yeah.
each other's only form of support. Like there's just like, I want to feel like I have my own individuality. Like there's just things that I feel like they could have like explored a little bit more, that would have kind of rung more true for someone in a relationship. I think, not that they, you know, there's only so much time they have in an episode, but there was just something there that I feel like they could have dived into a little bit more.
Honestly, fellas, I think that's something we all gonna deal with to the very day we die.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to serious us out real quick, you know, but it just, I'm being honest, it's just something, the human struggle is, and that's trying to stay true to yourself and cater to someone else's needs also. That's a balance and a challenge for real. And some days I'm not as strong as I am other days. And some days I'm like, I'm not up for it today. I don't have the energy today. And that's me those days choosing myself. But I've learned you can't do that every day. Some days it's gonna be about her. It's not about you today. So I think with that, I think all of us are just going, the human struggle, man. It's real. It really is.
For real. For real.
But I do think that's also part of like maturing and growing up. I think you're right. You're right, Jamar, that that's something that it's like a lifelong thing that you have to do, of constantly being like, what is just for me and what is like taking me time versus what is me being selfish, and really having to like figure out and toe that line. I wish the episode kind of did show that you can do both. Like
Both.
Scientifically speaking, like statistically speaking, it is important to have nights out with the guys. It's important when you're in a relationship to have another support group where you can do things. And as you said, T, you're not codependent and it's not everything is about this other person. So I wish that in all actuality, I kind of wish the episode ended with Cory still going to poker night, but keeping his ring on, because it's like, that's what you want. You want someone who's like not afraid to be their committed selves while out with a bunch of single men.
That would have been such a great cap to the episode too, to have it the cap to the episode, to have it start with them being at the poker game, get him getting teased for the ring, and then end it with him just not giving a damn about what they think about him wearing the ring. Like that would have been a beautiful way to tie it all together.
No, he don't care anyway. He just care about what Sean thinks.
Jamar, I think you pointed out something that I didn't recognize, which is that Cory, like in the show, Cory is trying to keep up and hang out with Gambling Dan. But when you actually watch it, it really is all about Sean. The episode even ends focused on Sean and focused on like how Cory perceives Sean living in this moment. And they want Cory and Sean to kind of be on the same page. And that's what a lot of this episode takes place.
Because the only reason why he's hanging out with Gambling Dan is because Sean is hanging out with him. He would not be around him at all if Sean wasn't around.
And you know what? We were talking in a previous episode about how, like, I didn't understand why Cory was trying to involve himself with Sean and Angela so much, like trying to like force their relationship to happen when they clearly like weren't trying to be together. And it feels as though that like Cory anticipated like Sean being stable as a way to keep our relationship stable. And if Sean's out there wandering the streets, he's out there wandering the world, I might lose Sean as well. So it just feels like that whole thing about like being in a relationship and having friends who are single and the challenges that come from that, which is a question I kind of want to ask you guys of like, have you struggled to maintain relationships with single friends while you're in relationships?
Yeah, a tad bit. Because also Cory knows if he loses Sean, it's going to affect him and Topanga's relationship because
Ooh.
that's his only friend. Him and Eric are not the closest. Don't get me wrong, they're close. I think they even had an episode. I don't know if y'all is that later the next
It's
season.
later. It's later. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not gonna touch on it too much. But they're brothers, but they're not the closest. So
Yeah.
if he loses Sean, it's gonna affect him and Topanga's relationship, and it's gonna affect it because Sean is his best friend, and it's gonna start taking effect in him and Topanga's relationship, and Topanga's gonna be able to notice. Topanga's very smart. It affect as far as affecting friendships. Yeah, recently, because all my friends are the same age as me, so but they having a hard time accepting like, hey man, yeah, we almost 30, bro. So
Yeah.
I'm focused on building my brand, or building this brand, and seeing about my lady. That's priority now. I'm not 19 anymore. Some of them are still. I'm not gonna say any names. Some of them are still stuck in their mind frame. We was 19, 20. We were roommates and we were having kickback parties. I'm good. I'm good now. So that's what I struggle with on my side.
For sure. For sure. Siege, do you experience any of that?
Absolutely. Yes. And it's funny that you say that because there are sometimes it's like unintentional. Like I remember a friend of mine got into a relationship and we did everything together and then it just stopped. So and I didn't like really take it hard. It was more of like well, if you're going to start doing that, then I need to figure out something else to do. And I'm going to start making friends, kind of like Sean is doing, and
Yeah.
expand my circle. But when he came back, he was like, yo, we don't do things anymore. And I was like, well, whose fault is that?
Right.
It's just like it's not even like a blame thing, more of like you had your priorities, you needed to create your like space and focus on your relationship. Well, I now need my own support group and I have to find other things. So I think you're right that would have also been like a really interesting storyline to kind of show how Sean needs to find other friends other than Cory because Cory is now engaged and that's
Yeah.
going to be his priority. T, what about you? Have you experienced that?
Yeah. You know what? I would say in high school, especially, I got into a serious relationship in high school. And I had been like really good friends with just a bunch of single dudes up until that point. And I remember like honestly like getting some beef about wanting to hang out with my girlfriend all the time. And I was just like, oh, you guys don't get why I would want to like hang out with my girlfriend. Like I just like I remember getting some attitude about it, but like that was just when I was so much younger. And what I'm now finding, and for those who don't know, like I moved to California a few years ago, and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, already lived here. So it's like every relationship that I've made out here has been while I've been in a relationship. And what I notice is that it's like when you're a couple, you tend to hang out with other couples.
Right,
Like you
right.
just tend to. Like you need a
Naturally,
dynamic.
right.
Naturally, like the girls want to talk sometimes, the guys want to talk, or even if there's just like even like when I hang out with Siege and his dude, like we all just like have conversations that we're able to have cross each other, and like it's just a way that kind of makes I don't know, each person in the couple feel like they're hanging out with friends, even if it's just like that too. I don't know. I've been in situations where like we I mean I still do have a handful of like single friends that I hang out with. That's not the case, but it's just sometimes you feel like, oh, are they a third wheel? Like I don't want to make them feel like a third wheel. Would inviting them make them feel like a third wheel? Like would that make them uncomfortable? Like all of that, the politics of that. I feel like I feel a lot more than like the beef of being in a relationship for my single friend. It's more just like, oh, I want to include them, but I don't want them to. All these other people are couples, and they're the only single person. Is that going to make them feel left out? Like that kind of shit.
And even with it's like that, and I'm learning in the content world too. I'm 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 open to creating relationships like this. This at the point in the age I'm at, man, it's the lady and the content, right? That's it. And I'm excited to make friends or relationships like you two, right? That and more people. There's more people. I'm starting to realize, oh, there's more people out there like me. That like I love Boy Meets World. It's one of my top 5 favorite shows. Um, and there's people like that out there. You just gotta find them. You know. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that.
I think to your point, Jamar, it comes down to, and even to it comes down to like familiarity. And there is something about like when you are a couple and you're hanging out with another couple, it's just like you're seeing the kind of discussions or arguments or personality traits in each other in the other couple, and it's like, oh, you do that too, and she did. Oh, she's the one who is messy, and he's the one who has a problem with the door being left open, and like all this other stuff. And it's just like all those kind of conversations that you have with each other, you see reflected in a different dynamic.
Yeah.
But that's fun and that's cool. Whereas when it's with another single person, either that single person doesn't get it or that single person feels like they have to choose sides. And as a couple, you're like, oh, no, there's no sides. There's just dynamics. And when it's another couple, you can see that dynamic reflected a little bit better than when it's just the one.
What's interesting is that like it feels like the reason why Cory needs Sean so much is because he's almost perfected this dynamic of like, no, Sean's actually the one person who I can hang out with while being in a relationship, who actually enhances my relationship instead of takes away from it, which isn't always the dynamic I tend to find being in a couple that like, oh, having the single person hang around actually brings us closer together. Like I haven't really felt that before, but I can see that Cory feels that, which is really interesting.
But that also probably explains why Cory wants Sean back in a relationship.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, like if you are back in a relationship, then we are getting that kind of two couples dynamic again. And I don't feel bad about inviting you. As you said, like, I don't feel like Sean's the third wheel. I feel like Sean has his own thing to do while he's also helping me make my relationship better.
Yeah. But what helps with those three is those three has always been friends. Even before Topanga and Cory were a thing, it was Cory, Topanga, and Sean, right? So, and then what helps too about the relationship part, Angela and Topanga are cool.
Yeah.
So, and I'm pretty sure he would love them to get back together. So, hey, man, let's not make it awkward. You know, Topanga hangs with Angela a lot anyway. So, yeah, I might as well be together. You know, I'm assuming that's what he. You know,
yeah, at this point in time, Topanga and Angela are considered best friends. So yeah, that.
Even though we've never seen them do best friend shit, like we literally never seen them even hang out or talk outside of the boys. But
what are you talking about? Today we saw them in the showers and they were hanging out, which I did want to talk about that scene.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about that.
Okay. There's a scene where it's actually one of the very few scenes we get of just Topanga and Angela talking alone. Of course, they're in the showers because they couldn't have just had this conversation in the common room. It had to be in the showers. And anyway, at this point in time, Angela's like, oh, you really think he's not going to go back now that you've given him freedom to just do what he wants?
Yeah.
And Topanga's like, he's not. It's Cory. Like, that's not Cory's scene anyway. And then they talked about like the type of girls who work at places like that. And at first, like, it's funny because you get like a lot of like internalized misogynies from the two female characters. Like Topanga's like, oh, only, for lack of a better word, only sluts work there anyway. And Angela's like, actually, maybe not. Some people work there to get through and get by. Some people have circumstances. And I was like, okay, that's good. But then we meet a waitress who's like, oh, I work there. And Angela just completely does a leap. And she's like, oh, girl, I understand. You were on hard times. You had to hook for money. You were out losing Isaiah. I get her. And I was like, where did this come from?
And the girl, she's a sweetheart. The girl, she's just a college kid, just wanted to work there, just to work there.
She's a chef.
Yeah, she's like, I could.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yo, okay, yeah, and it's funny, too, because Angela says something, too, like, you know, these girls were forced into a life of sin. Like they keep like throwing in like the sin morality thing.
Or the 90s, man.
Yeah.
90s.
To the first point of what you brought up, I thought it was really interesting how Topanga has this conversation with Cory where she's like, dude, I trust you. You can do whatever you want. I don't care as long as you respect me. Cool, cool, cool. And then later she's talking to Angela. She's like, oh no, he's not going to go back there. Yeah, I told him he could do whatever he wants, but he's not going to go back there. And I was just like, oh, well, that's interesting because it feels like you weren't being completely honest with Cory now. You are feeling like you communicated and he has this understanding, even though that's not what you said. So I thought that was really interesting.
All right, can I tell you my perspective from that? Because
Yeah, please,
I've had
please.
this dynamic like with my partner, which is there's this thing of being like saying you can do whatever you want to do as long as you want to do it. So if you want to do it, that's fine. But if you're doing it because you feel like you should be doing it, or if you're doing it to like put on airs, that's when I have a problem. So there have been plenty of times, both with me and my partner, where both of us are like, do what you want to do. And then someone will do something, we'll be like, now, did you want to do that? Or did you just do that because you had the freedom to do it? Because if you just did it because you had the freedom to do it, then I'm mad. Not because of any other reason, then like, why did you do that? Why did you feel the need to do that? But if you did that because you wanted to, well, then I don't have a problem with it. And I think that that's why Topanga's like, oh, he's not going to go back because that's not Cory. And if Cory does go back, well, then Cory's not going back because Cory enjoys places like that. Cory's going back because he still is putting the opinions of others in front of our relationship. Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong. T, do you have any relatability to that?
I feel like sometimes, and this isn't always the case, sometimes I feel like communication can sometimes get like murky when you're like implying something that you're not saying specifically. So this idea of Cory being like, so I can do anything I want. She's like, yeah, I can go anywhere I want. Yeah. And then later on just being like, yeah, he told me, but I told him he could do whatever he wants, but he's not going to do that. Like, it just, to me, it just felt like, man, you know what? Actually, she feels a certain way about it that it doesn't seem like she's just like coming straight out with that could create resentment or conflict or whatever. So that's all I was getting from that.
Reply as a person who's been this person, I'm going to say that again, that doesn't mean I don't feel a way about it. But like, if I know that you're doing it because you genuinely want to do it and it brings you joy, then I'm like, yo, do I like that brings you joy? Not really, but like it does, and I'm okay with that because I want you to be happy. But again, if you're out there, I'm like, nah, do what you want to do. It's one of those like, nah, go have fun, and then you go have fun. Oh, so you really
have fun?
Do you really enjoy this? This is what brings you happiness? Oh, okay.
Like that's what I'm talking about. That like inner need to just tell someone like, no, you do you. Fine, I'm gonna do me. You do you. That whole like thing where like you're pretending like some shit don't matter to you that matters to you. Like it's there's a bravado that like trying to protect yourself from getting hurt by saying I don't care about anything, which is sometimes not true to yourself and like true to like what your needs actually are.
I think it's a balance. I think what you just brought up is like there is this balance of, hey, I want you to do what makes you happy. And if that's something that doesn't make me happy, I have to then be honest about that. So it's just like, hey, I want you to do what makes you happy. But if you do what makes you happy and it turns out that bothers me, well, then it is up to me to be like, okay, you know what? I said that, but I do want you to know that does affect me. And I think like Topanga, when we go back to it, we bring it back to Topanga being like, hey, because I have feelings too, that's the point. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Just so we don't end up talking for like 3 hours, is there like any standout parts of the episode that you guys wanted to like talk about or like comment on? Because I have a few things that I wrote down that I just wanted to kind of get into, and I just want to make sure that we all have time to like address like notes that we had. Like one of the things I wanted to say, for example, was that the Tushy dance just felt like the hokey pokey. Like I didn't understand what was so controversial about this dance where people are covering their asses with their hands. Like What's wrong with this?
I would have walked out. They would start
Yeah,
pussy
like
dancing around me.
it's
What is this?
corny. It's corny. It's so corny. Oh man. I also thought it was very, very funny that Eric went to this restaurant and he was like, yeah, can I get a tuna with the crust cut off and cut it into triangles like my mommy makes it for me?
Bro, he is hilarious. He's hilarious, bro. He's one of my
so
favorite
funny.
characters. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, he's great in this episode. At one point, Cory talks about
Topanga.
guys going to steam baths and cockfights, which I thought was interesting.
Bro,
Go ahead.
You know, every time I seen this episode and that part went over my head, but I watched it again when she said that. I was like, did she just say? And for some reason, her saying whipped was funny to me.
Oh man.
Because she was like, you whipped? And he was like, yeah. I was like, cause yeah, you are whipped, bro. I just wasn't, I guess I was so used to my Disney Channel ears when watching Boy Meets World.
Yeah.
I wasn't, I thought she was gonna use something else like, oh, you just in love. Or like, oh, you whipped, bro. That's okay. That part just stood out to me.
I thought it was interesting that the club had an entire pack of wedding rings that people had left behind. Like, I thought that was like a really telling commentary on the whole thing.
I do think that there's something to be said about the waitress being like, "Oh, your ring that accidentally fell off. All right, how about you looking at it through this bag of rings that accidentally fell off?" You know, like, and I do like there's a lot of commentary on like the levels to which men will protect themselves and kind of tell stories to themselves. And it's like, oh, I didn't want to be here. My friends dragged me here. Yeah. I only took my ring off because they made me. And from the waitress's point of view, Cory, you're just like everybody else. You know, yeah, totally. And I think she has some validity in that moment.
Yeah, totally. And you know what? Something else that kind of drove me crazy that I just wanted to touch on real quick with Jack and Eric and Rachel is that like this whole storyline is Rachel has to write a paper, which by the way, I'm really happy that we're seeing Rachel the academic and not Rachel the sex object, which is what she's been for most of the season. Like she's like, I really want to work on this paper and like I'm just observing you. And the guys are freaking out and they're like kind of, I don't know, being dicks to her. And eventually they're just like, oh, we just want you to know that, you know, you've just changed the way we see women. We just respect women so much more now after we met you. And that's what makes this really difficult to enjoy. And she's like, oh, guys, I'm flattered. And they're like, now leave so we can have fun. And that's the end of Rachel's storyline. Like, it's not like we never get to see her presentation on the paper. We never get to like hear her findings on it. Like it just felt like they just said, okay, yeah, we respect you now, go away and leave us alone. So it was just like a weird wrap up to that storyline, I felt.
For me, I was going to bring that scene up too. Specifically the idea that Jack and Eric were like, oh, you've helped us see women as people now, and we appreciate that, but also want you to leave so we can stop doing that. And I thought that was very interesting that they were like, oh, because it is like going back to Sean and Angela and Cory and Topanga and how Gambling Dan sees Cory being engaged. All of it is, oh, you've made women real. And if they're real, then we have to respect them. So we would much rather for women to not be here so we didn't have to respect so we could still have our dichotomy of the Madonnas and the whores. Like, we want our Madonnas over here so we can be with the whores over here.
Yeah. No, it's true. Like, they'd be painting like it's like the either or thing. And honestly, I think that was probably my favorite part of the whole episode was them checking Angela and Topanga and like really the show's concept of the either or, just being like, no, normal girls work here. I'm just a chef. Like, I'm doing, like, Rachel's writing her paper and then the girl who's there, she's like, oh, you're in such and such class? Oh, I'm in that class too. What's your paper on? Like, just talking about college stuff, like just normalizing all of it and pretending like, hey, there isn't an either or. There's actually a lot of gray in between.
I mean, that scene passes the Bechdel test. Like, I was like,
hey.
Doesn't, because I don't know if she's a named character, but I will say that it was something to where I was like, well, I want to hear what that girl's paper's on. You know, like, I wish we had gone like one step further. But overall, so Jamar, we have this thing called a bruh moment, where it's like a moment that and maybe we've kind of already hit it. Feel free to mention it again. But like, it's a moment that was like so shocking. It took you out of the world of the show and just made you be like, yo, what was that? What's
Yeah,
your
like
bruh moment?
sometimes a bruh moment is like something that was okay in the 90s that just like, whoa, that shit wouldn't fly today, or like it's just one of those things that just rubbed you the like wrong way, like Siege says. So like if there was any part of that, I'd be interested to know, or the top moment that made you go, bruh.
When Sean told him to take his ring off.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
great one. We didn't even
You,
touch on that. Yeah.
Sean, Sean cannot tell him that. With the guy, the gambling guy, the lackey that was with him, even the chicks that worked at the club can tell him that. You, of all people, should know better than tell Cory to take off his ring.
That's such a great point, because what we don't talk about is Sean's disrespect for Topanga in that moment.
Yeah, he knows better. Yeah.
Because he was also the one that told Cory to lie to her about kissing Lauren at the ski lodge. So it just feels like, even though he's his boy and he understands the dynamic of the relationship, he's team Cory ride or die. And it just doesn't feel like there's a respect there for Topanga. That's an interesting point.
He's also the one who lies when they're like, hey, where were you guys tonight?
Babe 2, Pig in the City.
Yeah, we went to the movies. Right, exactly.
Exactly. That's a very good point. I was actually really, I was like, really? Like something like that. But I think you're right in the fact that Sean was the one to be like, yo, can you just take it off? I was like, hey, wait a minute. Who are you? You know, like it is an overstep.
He is the last person in that room that should be telling them that.
That's a really
right behind Jack and Eric.
Yeah.
I feel like, yo, bro, that's you out of pocket. You out of pocket.
For real.
Man.
For real.
Yeah.
See, what's your bruh moment?
Oh, mine? You know, like I said, there was just a lot of stuff in this episode that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But there's one part where Cory's like, because Topanga's asking, like, why did you take your ring off? And he kind of like tries to double down and justify it by saying, like, there's some places a man goes where he feels uncomfortable wearing an engagement ring. And even some married guys don't wear them. So it's like not a big deal. And just like this kind of like feeling like, hey, I know I fucked up, but I'm going to try to justify it. I know I crossed the line, but like, I'm not as bad as other guys. And in comparison to all this other stuff, like, it's really not that big of a deal. It just felt like he could have just validated her a little bit better.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I actually like both of y'all's. I think like they actually hit on like the kind of really important key moments of the episode that really say a lot. I feel really bad about mine, but it's just the one. And that was when Angela got on her soapbox and started talking about 90s crack babies and judging the waitress for not even being a waitress, for being a cook.
That was one of the ones I was thinking about too when y'all asked me about a bruh moment. That was the other one.
It just, the thing is, it came out of nowhere. And I was like, oh, because Angela was the one who was like, hey, some people take these jobs out of circumstance. And I was like, oh, good for you. Sometimes you take a job just because it's a job. But then she was like, girl, exactly. I get it. You was on the streets. You've been touched by your daddy. I was like, what?
It felt very Clinton Three Strikes like perspective. Of like what makes a person get into this lifestyle versus like a reality of it. So yeah,
let's also talk about like what this lifestyle is. It's crazy. But then also I will say after that, Topanga says something that I was like, well, what you mean by that? Because Topanga was like, Angela's been real sensitive lately. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? Because we know that Angela has been bringing up like her Black studies lately. Angela's more socially conscious lately and being like, I gotta get me some Black friends. Rodney King just got beat not too long ago.
No, I think this is more OJ. I think is where we're at now.
OJ. So I'm just
maybe closer to Monica Lewinsky. Who knows?
They said something along the lines of Angela's just been real sensitive lately, and I was like, what do you mean by that? Like, I thought it meant Sean and what's going on with Sean, but I was just like, there are ways to read that sentence. I want to know what you mean.
All right. I read it as a Sean thing, but you're right. It could be either way.
I did too, but since you put it like that,
Exactly. She didn't say she's been very sensitive about Sean or she got personal things going on. She said Angela's been very sensitive lately. And we did see Angela like go from 3 to 60. So I'm like, what you mean? So
But then
that's
again, if she asks her that, she'll be like, see? Like, oh man, yeah,
And
that's a great
also,
point.
it also would have been like, because we kind of saw Topanga kind of develop and evolve and understanding. Like she spoke to this person. She was like, you know what? I'm actually gonna go check it out. I'm open-minded enough to like go down there and get a look for myself and form my own opinion. And we never get that from Angela. We see Angela like kind of being like bitter about Sean going to this place, but we never like figure out what's causing that hurt. She never kind of talks about it. We never get a moment of circling back to her. She just goes in the shower and that's the last we see of her. So it would have been better to like at least make it like have a moment to humanize that bitterness a little bit with like, hey, I am hurting because of Sean or whatever. Like,
I'll say that's not the last that we see of her because she is in the common area playing
You're
pool.
right. You're right. Playing
and
pool.
there is a scene where, again, Topanga has just said, by the way, all those dudes you're hanging out with, they want what we have. And that's when when Cory is like, hey, I'm going to stay home with Topanga. Again, I think it would have been better had he gone. But you see Sean walk off by himself and he looks at Angela and Angela looks at him. And it's just like this yearning of like, like you won't let us be together. And because Sean's determined to live out his single college lifestyle, they both can't have what they want.
Yeah, you could tell he's hurting because when at first she didn't see him, he was staring at her from behind her. And that's the part when I was like, yeah, see, there it is. He's hurting. He just handled it in the most Sean way you can ever handle it.
Something I just want to quickly say about that before we move on. Did you notice that Sean is wearing the baggiest jeans of all time in that scene? Like they're very like almost like Jinkos, like that. I don't know. Like I think we're starting to get to the 90s where like it's like overly big baggy jeans, but like he was wearing something. I was just like, man, those jeans don't fit.
In the last episode I was watching, he's wearing like this huge leather jacket, and it's just like he's like swimming in these clothes.
Yeah, that was the time. That was the period we were swimming in it. All of my clothes were like down, like this big in the 90s. It was cool.
Yeah, you gotta take a knife, put some more holes in that belt.
Yeah, you're right. You used to have to do
real.
That. What's your Feeny lesson, Jamar? So, like, what's the overall lesson of the episode?
Be comfortable in your skin. You are Cory Matthews. The way you are, you've been like that's who you were as a kid. That's who you are as a teenager and as an adult. That's who you are. That's who Topanga is. The reason why you and Topanga are together is because you are who you are, right? Yeah. And this was ordained by a higher power. So if you wouldn't be Cory, it wouldn't be no Topanga. So just relax, bro. Be yourself. Yeah. Everything is going to stay the course. If Sean is meant to still be in your life, it's going to happen. Just be yourself. That's what I took from the whole episode. Be comfortable being yourself. Of being who you are in your skin. That's all.
For sure. My Feeny lesson, I think it's kind of a combination between like the grass is kind of always greener on the other side, and just that they're like open communication is a way to solve most problems. So like a simple open conversation.
95% of the problems. Yeah.
Like just having a conversation with Topanga before they even went could have solved a lot of this. Having a conversation with Rachel before they went could have solved a lot of this. Believing when someone says like, I'm comfortable with this, I'm not comfortable with this. Just like, it just feels like open communication is just something that like could have been used as a tool. So I don't know if that's a Feeny lesson, but that's just my takeaway. Siege?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to do like a combination of both of you, which is just to say that as a engaged individual or as someone in a relationship, you're going to need me time. That's okay. Just make sure that you're respecting your relationship in whatever form that comes. That's it.
For sure.
Do you, but also remember your partner has feelings. I think that's my Feeny lesson.
Yeah, you got to come back home.
You got it. Look, do what you want, but you come back home and you got to face those consequences.
That's
for real.
Okay, what grade are you guys giving this episode? Again, Jamar, what grade would you give this episode?
From like
I'll
an
give it a B.
A. Oh yeah.
A B plus.
Okay.
B
Only reason
plus.
why it's not getting an A is because of some of the things you guys touched on. Was I would love to see him go back to the playing poker with the ring on, and actually seeing how the report Rachel did. That's the only reason why it's not getting an A plus.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's a great episode. You learned a great lesson in it in itself, and it's just a great episode in general. So I'll give it a B plus.
You know what? I'm also gonna give this episode a B plus. I feel like that's a fair grade because I kind of walked into this episode thinking it was gonna be worse than it was, but it actually like had a lot of interesting conversations going on, and I think that they touched on a lot of things such as the relationship between men and women and just like all the stuff we talked about. B plus, B plus, B plus.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna say I feel like you guys gave it a little bit more than what I would. I'm gonna give it a B. Not because like I feel you're right, it does a lot really well. I also feel like there's a lot of excess. I feel like
Yeah.
there are things we could have eliminated. I feel like the Tushy dance is very juvenile, and and then also like we just don't go anywhere with the Jack, Rachel, and Eric storyline
At all.
Yeah.
At all.
So I feel like because of that, I do want to give it demerits, but it is better than what I thought it was going to be, and it says a lot more things than I thought. So yeah, I think it's a good
Yeah.
B episode.
Yeah.
Definitely. Right.
Okay, Jamar, do you have any homework?
Homework.
Homework can be anything that you like want to recommend. It could be anything that you're watching now. Yeah, let us know.
I would say, are you guys Nickelodeon fans?
For sure.
I would say I've been binge watching Are You Afraid of the Dark? Halloween is my favorite time of year, fall, winter.
Yes.
So I'm spooky season. I would say, man, whenever you get a chance, rewatch it. Get some nostalgic feels from that.
Yo, all right. I'm gonna nerd out for just a second with Jamar because I can love Are You Afraid of the Dark. I'm so into Halloween. I'm so into spooky season. And like legitimately, there are some episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark, that first season especially, that like stuck with me my entire childhood. Like core memory stuff. Like the way that people talk about like seeing The Exorcist for the first time and all that stuff. I'm like, yeah. Did you see the clown episode where they took his nose though? Because like that was my Exorcist moment when I was a kid.
Absolutely. T, what's your homework?
Okay, so you know what? In terms of just like spooky stuff, I started watching a show called Paper Girls on Amazon. Are you guys familiar with it?
I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
Yo, you know what? I got into the show so fast. It's basically about these girls who, they deliver papers. It takes place in the 1980s. It focuses specifically on a young Chinese girl and her mom who doesn't understand English, and they're in this town where they're not really treated very well, and she's starting this new job and she's kind of nervous about it. And as she goes, she kind of runs into these other paper girls who are out working the day after Halloween, and suddenly they get transformed, like they go from 1985 to 2019. They go through time and they have to figure it out, and they like meet their future selves, and the reality of like, oh, this is what my life becomes. Wait, what do you mean that all the things I thought was going to happen for my life didn't happen? Like, it's like really interesting content, like really interesting stuff. It's sci-fi in the way that I love sci-fi, where it explores like human behavior in a really interesting way. I don't want to give too much away, but just like that whole concept of meeting your future self and not meeting the expectations that you had for yourself at a young self is just really interesting. So I enjoyed it and I highly recommend it.
All right. Yeah, I definitely want to check that out. And like, there is this idea of like, what would young me think of me? I think it's something that people constantly are like trying to answer.
Yeah. Definitely. And the show really does a great job of exploring that. And the other thing I want to say is that the 4 leads are fantastic. They're young female actors. And it's a diverse cast. Like one of them is Jewish, one of them is Black, one of them is Asian. I think the other one might be some kind of LGBTQ. So it's just like really interesting the way that they're showing diverse storytelling from like a 1980s perspective. Because whenever I think of 1980s, I think of like white kids riding around on bikes with flashlights, like exploring and getting all these adventures.
like off of It, the first It.
Yeah, like the It or E.T. or Goonies, like we just weren't allowed to really participate without being stereotyped. So it's just nice to see a different take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my homework if you have not seen Don't Worry, Darling, check it out. I know there was a lot of controversy about it before it was released, but I feel like, especially for this episode, it's the right homework. This episode and the movie Don't Worry, Darling also has like a lot to say about like what it means to be in relationships. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was way more entertaining than what people made it out to be, and it's not as bad as people like kind of said it was before. But again, by the time this comes out, I feel like a lot more of the public opinion will have turned, and it'll be like, oh, it was an okay movie. I'm not saying it's Citizen Kane or anything. I'm saying that it's actually just a better movie than kind of like the press tour was giving it when it first came out. All right, Jamar, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Jamar, where can people find you? Where can people find your content? Like, let us know where our listeners can find you at.
Well, you can always follow us on Instagram at 80s, 90s, and 2005 with 00. Because a lot of people ask me, like, 80s, 90s, and 005 on Instagram. The same username on TikTok. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Also, we got a YouTube channel that we're trying to build, trying to figure out. I enjoy trying to figure out how to make content like a network. I enjoy the process. And importantly, check out our podcast. Me and Charles Burrow, me and Prime, the official 80s, 90s, and 2005 podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, etc. We're not visual yet. We getting there. You know, got some things to fix out. But y'all check that out.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Support your podcast, and if we can help with it with anything, let us know, because we out here supporting Black creators.
Y'all more than welcome, man. Anytime. Y'all more than welcome.
And trust, T and I, we are about 80s, 90s, and 2000s content. We watched it all. We talk about it all. We're here for it.
Oh man, that's dope to hear, man. I would love to do some more content with you guys, and so is Chabo and Prime. They excited to get to work, man. These guys are passionate about nostalgia, and you know, hey, more than welcome, man. The door is always open.
Awesome. Good to hear.
All right. So T, I think we should wrap this up. As we said, thank you guys so much for listening. You can find us at brunmeetsworld at gmail.com or at brunmeetsworld on any of the social platforms. T, I know we want you guys leaving us messages from our website. So go ahead, go to the website and leave us a voice recording. As you heard in previous episodes, we will play those. Keep giving us those 5-star reviews.
Watching the YouTube videos, leaving YouTube comments, leaving comments on Twitter, like TikTok and everything. We're trying to respond to them as fast as we can.
Yeah, we love that engagement. Okay, T, I think it's time to tell them to dream,
try,
and do good.
No, we gotta get Jamar to do it.
All right. Yeah. We'll do that. Sorry. Yeah. I was on automatic. We'll do it all.
Okay.
So, all right, T, I think it's time for us to tell them to dream,
try,
and do good.
Later, bros.
Later, bros.
When this boy meets world.